May 31st, 1984. A Thursday evening in Virginia. The guards at Mecklenburg Correctional Center were getting ready to end their shift. This wasn't just any prison. This was the place where Virginia kept its most dangerous criminals. The men who had done the worst things imaginable. The men society had decided didn't deserve to live. They called it America's toughest prison. But on this quiet evening, something was about to happen that nobody thought was possible. Something that would shock the entire nation and make people question everything they believed about prison security. Because 6 men were about to do the impossible. 6 killers on death row were about to walk out of the most secure prison in America, and nobody saw it coming. If you want to see how this incredible true story unfolds, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment below telling us what you think happened. Let's get into it. Let's go back a few years to understand how we got here. Richmond, Virginia, 1979. The city was living in fear. Someone was killing people, not just 1 or 2. Many people. And the murders were getting worse and worse. The police didn't know it yet, but they were looking for 3 brothers. Linwood Briley, James Briley, and Anthony Briley. These weren't just criminals. They were something else entirely. Linwood was the oldest. He was smart, calm, and calculated. When he spoke, people listened. Even other criminals were afraid of him. James was the middle brother. He followed Linwood's lead. And Anthony was the youngest, only 16, when everything started. In March 1979, a young man named John Gallagher disappeared. He was just helping someone who seemed to need it. That someone was Linwood Briley. John's body was found later. He had been shot, but this was just the beginning. The brothers didn't stop. They couldn't stop, or maybe they didn't want to. A disc jockey named Harvey Wilkerson was shot and killed in his own home. Then came Judy Barton, killed during a robbery. The brothers were moving through Richmond like shadows, leaving death behind them. Then something happened that made everyone realize just how dangerous these men were. October 5th, 1979, a Friday afternoon. 5-year-old Harvey Wilkerson, Jr. was playing in his house. His father had been killed by the Brilleys months before. Now they came back. They broke into the house where this little boy lived with his family. Inside were Harvey Jr., his mother Judy, and his pregnant aunt. The brothers tied them up. They robbed the house. But they didn't leave. What happened next was so horrible that even hardened police officers couldn't believe it. The brothers poured gasoline throughout the house. Then they lit it on fire. With the family still inside, still alive, Harvey Jr. died in the flames. He was only 5 years old. His aunt died, too. His mother barely escaped with her life, but she was badly burned. The city of Richmond was terrified. Who would do something like this? Who would hurt a child this way? The police worked day and night. They followed every lead. And finally, they caught them. When the Briley brothers were arrested, the evidence against them was overwhelming. Witnesses, physical evidence, confessions about some of the crimes. The trial didn't take long. Linwood and James Briley were sentenced to death. They would die in Virginia's electric chair. But they weren't the only ones heading to death row. While the Briley brothers were terrifying Richmond, other men across Virginia were committing their own terrible crimes. Earl Clanton was a truck driver. But in 1980, he did something unforgivable. He kidnapped a woman, hurt her badly, and then killed her. The courts sentenced him to death. Derek Peterson looked like he could be a model or an actor. He was handsome, well-dressed, and charming. But in 1981, he shot and killed a young father during a drug deal gone wrong. Death sentence. Willie Lloyd Turner was convicted of killing a store owner during a robbery in 1978. When caught, he showed no regret, no sadness for what he had done. The court sent him to death row 2. And then there was Lem Tuggle. In 1983, he killed a woman in her own home. He was already a convicted criminal when he did it. Another death sentence. By 1984, all these men found themselves in the same place. Mecklenburg Correctional Center, C-Pod, death row, The prison was built like a fortress. Thick concrete walls, guard towers with armed officers watching every corner, metal detectors, double doors that wouldn't open unless the first door was closed, security cameras, regular checks and counts of prisoners. The men on death row were kept in separate cells. They were allowed out for only 1 hour a day. Guards watched their every move. Every visitor was searched. Every phone call was monitored. Every piece of mail was read. This wasn't just any prison. This was designed to hold the worst of the worst. Men who had nothing to lose. Men who would do anything to escape because they knew they were going to die anyway. The prison officials were confident. Nobody escapes from death row. It had never happened before. It would never happen. They were wrong. Inside C-Pod, something was brewing. The men started talking, quietly, carefully. They knew the guards were listening. They knew the walls might have ears. Linwood Briley was the one who brought them together. Remember, this was a man who had led a gang of killers in Richmond. This was a man who knew how to plan, how to organize, how to make people follow him. He started studying the prison, every detail, every routine, every guard, every door, every lock. He noticed something interesting. The guards followed the same schedule every day. They did the same things at the same times. They became comfortable, predictable. He noticed something else, too. The guards were human. They made mistakes. They got lazy. They forgot to check things. And Linwood realized something important. The prison's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Everyone believed it was impossible to escape. So nobody was really looking for an escape attempt. The guards didn't expect it. The officials didn't prepare for it. Linwood shared his thoughts with James, his brother, then with Earl Clanton, then Derek Peterson, then Willie Turner, then Lem Tuggle. 6 men, all sentenced to death, all with nothing to lose. They started making a plan, a crazy, impossible plan. Hit that subscribe button if you're hooked by this story. Comment below what you think their plan was. The next part will blow your mind. The plan was simple but brilliant. They wouldn't dig tunnels. They wouldn't cut through bars. They wouldn't use violence. They would use something much more powerful. They would use disguises. They would use the guards' own routines against them. They would make the prison help them escape. But they needed supplies. They needed things that prisoners aren't supposed to have. This is where it gets interesting. Because somehow these men on death row started getting things. Civilian clothes that looked like guard uniforms. Fake identification badges. Tools. Information about guard schedules. How did they get these things? That's a mystery that bothered investigators for years. Someone was helping them from the outside. Someone was bringing them what they needed. But who? Some people think it was family members who visited. Others think it was corrupt guards. The truth was never fully discovered. What we do know is this. By May 1984, they were ready. They picked their date carefully. May 31st, a Thursday. The evening shift. When the guards were tired and thinking about going home, they had watched and waited for months. They knew exactly what would happen and when. They knew which guards would be on duty. They knew which doors would be open. They knew everything. The morning of May 31st arrived like any other day at Mecklenburg. The guards did their routine checks. The prisoners ate their meals. Everything seemed normal. But inside C-Pod, 6 men were preparing for the most daring escape in American history. Around 10:45 p.m., it began. The guards heard a call from one of the cells. A prisoner needed medical attention. This wasn't unusual. Prisoners sometimes got sick or hurt. 2 guards walked toward the cell. They were following procedure, doing their job. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. What happened next happened so fast that nobody could react in time. The cell door opened. But it wasn't just one prisoner. It was all 6 of them. And they weren't sick. They were dressed in clothes that looked like guard uniforms. The real guards were shocked, confused. By the time they understood what was happening, it was too late. The escapees didn't hurt them badly. They didn't want murder charges on top of everything else, but they needed to control the guards. They tied them up. They took their keys, their radios, their identification badges. Now came the hardest part: walking out. Death row was deep inside the prison. To get out, they had to pass through multiple security checkpoints. Each one had guards. Each one had locked doors. Each one should have stopped them. But remember, they had studied everything. They knew the routines. They split into two groups. They moved calmly, confidently. They looked like guards escorting prisoners. They used the real guards' radios to communicate. They answered questions in ways that didn't raise suspicion. First checkpoint. They passed through. Second checkpoint. They showed the stolen ID badges. The guard barely looked up. He was used to seeing guards move prisoners around. He waved them through. Third checkpoint. The final one before freedom. This was the most dangerous moment. If anyone looked closely, they would see something was wrong. The uniforms weren't quite right. The badges were fake. These men didn't really look like guards, but nobody looked closely. The guard at the checkpoint saw what he expected to see: guards and prisoners. He pressed the button. The door unlocked. And just like that, 6 killers from death row walked out of America's toughest prison. They walked across the parking lot. They found a van waiting for them. Someone had arranged it. Someone on the outside was helping. They drove away into the night. Inside the prison, it took almost 15 minutes before anyone realized what had happened. The tied-up guards couldn't call for help. The radios had been taken. By the time someone found them, the escapees had a good head start. When the alarm finally went off, the prison erupted in chaos. Guards ran everywhere. Officials made frantic phone calls. Police across Virginia were notified. 6 killers. 6 death row inmates. Gone. The biggest manhunt in Virginia's history was about to begin. The news spread like wildfire. By midnight, every police station in Virginia knew. By morning, the entire country knew. 6 men who had been sentenced to death had simply walked out of prison. The FBI got involved. State police. Local police. Sheriff departments. Everyone was looking for them. Roadblocks went up on every highway. Police checked cars, trucks, buses. They searched train stations and bus stations. They watched airports. They showed the escapees photos everywhere. The public was terrified. These weren't just escaped prisoners. These were killers. Men who had murdered children. Men who had shown no mercy to their victims. People locked their doors. They kept their children inside. They called the police if they saw anything suspicious. But where were the 6 men? Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. The escapees didn't stay together. That would have been too obvious. Too easy to spot. Instead, they split up. Each man went his own way. This made the manhunt much harder. Police weren't looking for 6 men traveling together. They were looking for 6 men who could be anywhere. Let's follow what happened to each of them. Lem Tuggle was the first to get caught. But it took 19 days. He had been hiding in the mountains of Virginia, moving at night, sleeping during the day, stealing food when he could. On June 19th, a man in Vermont saw someone who looked suspicious. The man was dirty, tired, and nervous. The Vermont police were called. They checked his identification. It was fake. When they figured out who he really was, Lem didn't run. He didn't fight. He just gave up. Maybe he was too tired. Maybe he knew it was over. 1 down, 5 to go. Willie Turner was caught next, but his capture was dramatic. He had made it all the way to Vermont, too, not far from where Tuggle was caught. He was hiding in a house, staying with people who didn't know who he really was. On June 20th, the police got a tip. They surrounded the house. They called for Willie to come out. But Willie had a gun. Nobody knows where he got it. Maybe someone on the outside gave it to him. Maybe he stole it. The police weren't taking chances. They knew what this man was capable of. They knew he had killed before. There was a standoff. Police negotiators talked to Willie for hours. They tried to convince him to surrender peacefully. Finally, Willie gave up. He walked out with his hands up. He was arrested without anyone getting hurt. 2 down, 4 to go. Earl Clanton was the third to fall. He had been moving through the southern states. He made it all the way to Georgia. He thought he was safe. He thought nobody would recognize him so far from Virginia. He was wrong. On June 22nd, he was at a motel. A clerk thought he looked familiar. She had seen his photo on the news. She called the police. When the police arrived, Earl tried to act normal. He tried to convince them he was someone else, but they knew. They had his fingerprints. They had his photo. Earl was arrested without a fight. 3 down, 3 to go. Now things get interesting, because the last 3 men stayed free much longer than anyone expected. Derek Peterson, the handsome one who looked like a model, was clever. He had made it all the way to Philadelphia. He changed his appearance. He grew a beard. He wore different clothes. He acted like a normal person. He got a job. He made friends. He blended in. For weeks he lived a normal life. He went to work every day. He came home every night. Nobody suspected anything. But on September 4th, someone recognized him. Even with the beard, even with the different clothes. His face had been on the news too many times. The police came. This time there was a chase. Derek ran through the streets of Philadelphia. He jumped over fences. He hid in alleys. But there were too many police. They caught him. 4 down, 2 to go. The 2 Briley brothers were still out there. Linwood and James, the masterminds of the escape, the most dangerous of all the escapees. They had stayed together, brothers to the end. They had also made it to Philadelphia. They were hiding in the same neighborhood where Derek had been caught. This was a mistake. The police were now watching that area very carefully. On June 19th, almost 3 weeks after the escape, the police got another tip. 2 men matching the Briley's description were seen in a garage. The police surrounded the building. They brought in a SWAT team. They weren't taking any chances with the Briley brothers. They called for the brothers to come out. At first, there was silence. Then the door opened. Linwood and James Briley walked out with their hands up. The escape was over. All 6 men were back in custody. The biggest manhunt in Virginia's history was complete. If you're amazed by this true story, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment. Let us know what you think should have happened to these men. But the story doesn't end there. After the recapture, people wanted answers. How did this happen? How did 6 men escape from death row? The investigation revealed some shocking things. The fake guard uniforms had been smuggled in piece by piece over months. Family members had brought in cloth during visits. The prisoners had sewn the pieces together in their cells. The identification badges were made from magazine photos and plastic covers. They weren't perfect, but in the dim light of the prison corridors, they were good enough. The biggest question was, who helped them from the outside? Who provided the van? Who knew the escape was happening? Some people were questioned. Some were suspected. But nobody was ever charged. To this day, it remains a mystery. The prison was investigated, too. How could security be so bad that 6 death row inmates could walk out? The findings were embarrassing. Guards had become lazy. They didn't check things carefully. They followed routines without thinking. They trusted that the prison's reputation would keep prisoners from even trying to escape. Mecklenburg Correctional Center was completely reorganized. New security measures were put in place. More cameras, more guards, more checks. Death row was eventually moved to a different facility entirely. Now came the question everyone was asking. What would happen to the escapees? They were already sentenced to death, but now they had escaped. They had assaulted guards. They had violated dozens of laws during their time on the run. The courts had to decide. Would they face new charges? New trials? In the end, the answer was simple. They were already going to die. New charges wouldn't change that. So the focus shifted to carrying out the original death sentences. Virginia's electric chair was waiting. Linwood Briley was the first to face his fate. On October 12, 1984, just a few months after the escape, Linwood was executed. He was 30 years old. In his final moments, he showed no fear, no regret. He made no apology to his victims' families. The execution was quick. Linwood Briley, the mastermind of the escape, was gone. James Briley followed his brother. On April 18, 1985, James was executed. He was 28 years old. Like his brother, James showed no emotion in his final moments. The Briley brothers had lived together, killed together, escaped together, and now they had died together. The other 4 men faced their fates too, though it took years. Earl Clanton was executed in 1990. He spent his last 6 years fighting his sentence, but in the end, the state of Virginia carried out the execution. Derek Peterson was executed in 1991. The handsome man who had blended in so well in Philadelphia spent 7 years on death row after his recapture. Willie Turner was executed in 1995. He spent 11 years waiting to die after being caught in Vermont. And Lem Tuggle, the first to be caught, he was executed in 1996. He spent 12 years fighting his sentence before Virginia finally executed him. All 6 men who escaped that night in May 1984 are now gone. So what's the lesson from all this? Some people say it shows that no prison is truly escape-proof, that human error will always be a factor, that determined criminals with nothing to lose will always find a way. Others say it shows that justice eventually prevails, that all 6 men were recaptured, that all 6 men faced the punishment they had been sentenced to. The truth is probably somewhere in between. What we know for certain is this. On May 31, 1984, 6 men did the impossible. They escaped from death row. They outsmarted one of the toughest prisons in America. But their freedom didn't last. Within weeks, they were all caught. And within years, they were all dead. The families of their victims got some closure. Justice was served, even if it was delayed. The prison system learned important lessons about security, about not becoming too comfortable, about always staying alert. And the rest of us? We learned that truth really is stranger than fiction, that real life can be more dramatic than any movie, because this wasn't a Hollywood story. This wasn't made up. This really happened. 6 killers escaped from death row, the biggest prison break in American history. And this is their true story. What do you think about this incredible escape? Do you think the security failures could happen again today? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this true crime documentary, make sure you're subscribed, because we have more amazing stories coming your way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.